So when you say C alternative, what are we actually meaning by this?
Yeah, so C alternative is, in this particular case, means it is a C-like language, so it has a very similar approach to programming. It's an imperative procedural language, which means you just write procedures, or some people say functions, but I'm just being old-fashioned. Sure. And that's the case. But in general, like when it's a C-like, you've got manual memory management everywhere as well. So you allocate your things, you freeze stuff, you manually all that lot. You have control over the memory layout, how things are accessed, how things... But just in general, like you have complete control that you can see with C, but because it's an alternative like modern systems, it is more designed for modern computers. We're not pretending now that they're on a PDP-11, which is what C was originally developed for. Of course, it's evolved over the years, and people still use C to this day, and I still use C and C++, obviously. But Odin is trying to be like, look, I've had frustrations with C, and I started Odin, God, nearly 10 years ago now. God, time flies. But yes, that's kind of what an alternative means in this case.
So what are some of those frustrations? Why would somebody want to use a language like Odin, or, you know, whether you want to talk about the other languages that are out there as well that are in a similar sort of vein as well? What are those issues and frustrations with C?
A lot of it's just a lot of the very little minor things. So C in general is a very productive language. It is surprisingly a smallish language. I'm saying smallish for a reason, because actual C, yeah, small, but C on the actual compilers is actually quite big, because you've got all the extensions, all the extra things on top of it. But it is a very productive language which does so much, and you can get by doing anything in it. Literally, you can program anything in it, from an operating system to a game to a graphical application to a web browser. Like literally anything you want, you can do in those sort of languages, because it is that it's low level enough that you've got control over memory, but it is a high level language, as in I'm not writing assembly.
Right.
Now,
yeah, I think a lot of people sort of make that mistake when they talk about C, they're like, "Oh, C is a low-level language." Like, no. C abstracts away really far from that machine code.
Oh yeah.
Yes, you can write it, and yes, it is lower level than a language like Python, for example. So it kind of depends on your reference point, but everything that is not assembly is a high-level language, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. And a lot of people may not find that also a bit confusing. Like, how is C a high level? I have to deal with memory manually. And it's like, you'd be surprised how little you actually sometimes have to. If you actually design the APIs and libraries correctly, and all the nice ones, it can be very high level. That's the actual surprising thing I always found before I even started Odin. I was trying to figure out how to make my C experience even better. And my realization was that a lot of these high-level scripting languages, like Python, as you explained, they just come with batteries included. And everything is there already. And with C, nothing comes batteries included, really. And the C standard library is dreadful, and you pretty much want to replace it straight away. But again, that's one of the gripes, right? Is the C standard library is dreadful. But again, that's just a library thing. What about the actual language itself? But a great example of this is that let's take some minor things. Like C doesn't actually have a proper array type in it. And what I mean by that is all array types get demoted to a pointer, which means you're doing pointer arithmetic all the time. You've got arrays with no bounds checking, which means you've now got out of bounds errors. Anything that's like this, called spatial memory safety, is gone out the window. There's this overload now. A pointer could be also an array. So there's this merging of concepts. The type system has got many different like implicit conversions all the time, because C is a very weakly typed language. So there's loads of implicit conversions going on, which can and will bite you in the arse. So it is, but it's just loads of little things as you go through with the language that they just start to annoy you. And anyone who has long-term experience with C, but also had experience with the languages, will know those problems. And with Odin, the whole point was can I try and solve that problem, and go literally systematically throughout it, and like, how do I redesign to get around these problems whilst still feeling like C, not being radically different, like say something like Rust. Rust is trying to solve other sets of problems, like for instance temporal memory safety as well as spatial, and do it through other means, but it doesn't feel like C when you program in Rust. because Rust isn't trying to be that, which is fine. That is absolutely fine. It's just not trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. So, a lot of one thing that often come up when we talk about anything involving C, and I'm sure a lot of these people don't actually write a line of code in their entire life. They've never written C in their entire life, but they'll say things like, "Oh, well, these aren't problems with C. That's just a skill issue on your part."
Yes and no. So there are skill issues, obviously, when it comes to anything within programming in general. But there are things where it's like, yeah, the language hasn't got enough protections in it, which you will catch your mistakes. And by the way, you'll make mistakes no matter how skilled you are, because mistakes can come from anywhere. They can even come from dodgy APIs, dodgy libraries, even your past self who might have been, I don't know, intoxicated at one time and you've just done something wrong. But I think this is half the problem, is that like, I'm also not saying that you need a full-on safety net when you're dealing with C, because a lot of time you actually want that control and that unsafety. That is kind of how the thing, it's the thing you're doing, is that unsafetyness. That's correct English, obviously.
Yeah.
But
Close it up.
unsafetyness. I'm making up new words now.
They'll work it out.
Sorry for people who English is not your first language. But this is kind of thing. So there are some issues with skill issues, because if you're not used to doing that sort of programming, you'll expect more high-level constructs. Like why can't I just allocate an array on the fly and do all this magical manipulations with all these hash maps and stuff? And it's like, yes, he hasn't got any of that. And that can be a frustration, and I completely understand it. But at the same time, it's not... When you deal with C, and I recommend anybody, if you're a programmer, to learn C, even if you don't use it as a day job or anything like that, just to learn that style of programming. Again, there's loads of different languages to learn, but C is a great way of learning that sort of style of programming. You're going to start thinking differently. It's the best way of doing it. Just thinking about how you solve a problem differently. Also thinking about, actually, how do these operating systems work? Because they're all written in C or C++ for the most part. So it's kind of very useful to understand that. And also it kind of forces you to understand how data structures work as well, directly.
Yeah, I think there's this desire in programming, especially now with like AI tooling being a thing, to produce a thing really quickly, to produce a website, to produce an application, and sort of jump over those initial steps of like that foundational computer science, where you really start to understand just how do things fit together. Like even just basic things, like if I'm going to use a hash map, what is a hash map? Like, not just, I can put a key in here, there's a value. Like, how does that actually work?
Yeah, and it's something which is going to be a problem with AI in general, is that the people who already know these skills and and the ones that also use AI, they're going to be fine because they already know the foundational stuff. But if you're a new programmer and you're skipping straight to the AI stuff in general, oh goodness, you're not going to know how to architect anything. You're not going to understand how things work, and when things go wrong, you're just going to be asking the LLM, like, can you fix this, please? Make no mistakes.
Right.
It doesn't really work. And again, I've still even used, I try using LLMs from time to time. Look, I'll always try out something new, see how it works, once a philosopher and all. But sometimes it's like, I know it makes mistakes. I know exactly where it's gone wrong, but I know why I have to do this. They're never going to be perfect, but they're going to be better than nothing sometimes for some people. Some people also, like, they're not interested in whatsoever. But again, if you don't have those foundations, how they work, you're never going to actually become a very good programmer. And there's always going to be a complete, literally, cap on your skill. And I recommend people learning, again, as many different ways of thinking with different languages, but one of them is especially C.